What makes a Rolex worth millions? It's not just the gold, the diamonds, or the brand name. At the highest level of collecting, value comes from something far more elusive: rarity, provenance, and timing. Because while most people associate Rolex with luxury and reliability, there exists a much more exclusive world where certain Rolex watches don't just sell for thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, but for millions. Today on Luxury Insights, we're taking you into that world. In this video, we're counting down the most outrageously expensive Rolex watches ever sold, pieces that shattered records, stunned the auction world, and solidified Rolex's place not just as a watchmaker, but as a cultural artifact. And we're saving the most expensive Rolex of all time for last, because that one didn't just break a record, it changed the way people value watches forever. Let's start with one of the most visually arresting vintage Rolexes ever made, the Rolex Daytona John Player Special. This isn't your average Paul Newman Daytona. It's a rare yellow gold reference 6241 with a deep black dial and square subdial markers that collectors associate with vintage Formula One branding. The nickname John Player Special comes from the British F1 team Lotus, whose black and gold livery inspired the look. Only a handful of these watches exist in the world, and when one surfaced at Phillips auction in Geneva, it sold for over $1.5 million. To the average buyer, it might just look like a vintage chronograph, but to those in the know, it's a unicorn. Another piece that lives in Rolex lore is the Rolex Bao Dai. This watch has it all: royal history, extreme rarity, and a configuration never repeated. Commissioned by the last emperor of Vietnam in the 1950s, the Bao Dai is a reference 6062 in yellow gold, with a black dial, diamond indices, and triple calendar moon phase complication. The combination of the complications, dial color, and historical provenance makes it a true one of one. It first sold at auction for over $370,000 in 2002, already a massive price back then. But in 2017, it came up again, and this time sold for over $5 million, making it the most expensive Rolex ever sold at that time. Then, there's the Rolex Daytona, reference 6265 in white gold, one of the rarest manual wind Daytonas known to exist. What makes this piece so valuable isn't just the metal, it's the mystery. Rolex never offered a white gold manual Daytona for sale. This watch was likely a custom order or a prototype made in extremely limited numbers, possibly even a one-off. It sold in 2020 for around $3.27 million and immediately became one of the most talked about auction results of the year. Collectors refer to it as a ghost because until it showed up, no one was even sure it existed. Now let's talk about the unicorn Daytona, a watch that lives up to its name, also a reference 6265. This particular Daytona is the only one confirmed to exist in white gold with a manual movement. Unlike Rolex's mass-produced steel sport models, the unicorn was likely built as a one-off for a very specific, high-profile client. When it went to auction in 2018, it didn't just cause a stir, it created shockwaves. It was offered by collector and dealer John Goldberger to benefit charity, and the final price? A staggering $5.9 million. The watch was fitted with a white gold bracelet and remains the only known example of its kind. It's the kind of watch that even the most elite collectors may never get the chance to see in person. But none of these watches, rare as they are, hold the title of the most expensive Rolex ever sold. That record belongs to a watch with a story so iconic, its name alone carries global recognition. A watch worn not by royalty or hidden away in a vault, but by a Hollywood legend who helped define modern cool. And in the second half of this video, we're going to reveal that watch, the story behind it, and the price that made history. Stay with us. The most expensive Rolex of all time is coming up next, and it's one you absolutely know by name. So far, we've seen Rolex watches sell for over $5 million, models once worn by emperors, constructed in rare metals, or made in quantities you could count on one hand, but none of them, no matter how rare or how intricately crafted, come close to the single most expensive Rolex ever sold. And that watch, it's not a diamond-studded piece of royalty, it's not platinum or vintage gold, it's a humble stainless steel chronograph, worn daily by a Hollywood icon, Paul Newman. The Paul Newman Rolex Daytona, reference 6239, isn't just a record holder, it's a legend. This watch was gifted to Paul Newman by his wife, Joanne Woodward, in the late 1960s. Engraved on the caseback were 3 simple words: "Drive carefully, me." At the time, Newman was developing a passion for motorsport, and this small gesture became one of the most enduring connections between Hollywood, horology, and human sentiment in luxury history. For decades, collectors dreamed of owning this particular watch, but it vanished from public view. Rumors swirled. Some said it was lost. Others believed it had been locked away in a private collection. Then, in 2017, the watch resurfaced in the most surprising way. It had been quietly passed on to James Cox, a former boyfriend of Newman's daughter, who had no idea just how valuable the watch had become. When it finally came up for auction at Phillips in New York, the watch world braced for history. The bidding opened at $1 million, and within just 12 minutes, the final hammer fell at $17.8 million, including buyer's premium. It shattered every Rolex record, every Daytona record, and briefly held the title of the most expensive wristwatch ever sold at auction. For a stainless steel chronograph with a manually wound movement and no precious stones, it was unheard of, but it proved something deeper about the way Rolex functions in the world of ultra-high-end collecting. What made this watch worth nearly $18 million wasn't its complication or its construction, it was the story. Paul Newman wore this watch. He raced in it. He lived in it. It wasn't kept in a vault. It wasn't pristine. It had scratches. It had character. It had life. And for collectors, that's the holy grail: authenticity. Provenance, a direct link to an icon whose influence helped elevate Rolex itself. Before the 6239 became known as the Paul Newman, the exotic dial Daytonas were actually slow sellers. Authorized dealers had trouble moving them. But Newman's consistent public appearances with the watch, combined with his racing career, gave the model cult status. As vintage watch collecting surged in the 1990s and early 2000s, those exotic dial configurations became the most sought-after Daytonas in the world. And once Newman's personal watch hit the auction block, it cemented the Daytona as the modern collector's Rolex. Since that record-breaking sale, other exotic dial Paul Newman Daytonas have sold for millions, but none have touched the original. Even the Bao Dai and the Unicorn, for all their rarity, sit in its shadow. Why? Because story sells. That's something every serious collector eventually learns. You can buy precious metal, diamonds, even limited production. But a story, that kind of provenance, you can't recreate it. You can't manufacture it. It only happens once. And the impact of that moment is still felt today. The Paul Newman sale permanently changed the way Rolex watches are viewed in the high-end space. Auction houses began giving Rolex prime placement. Collectors once focused solely on Patek or Vacheron started looking back at vintage Rolex, and buyers started hunting, not just for flashy modern models, but for hidden gems with historical weight. It also changed how people buy. Savvy investors now focus more on backstory, condition, original papers, and dial variations than just what's trendy. In other words, they're not just buying watches, they're buying the legacy behind them. So where do we go from here? Could another Rolex one day surpass the Paul Newman Daytona's record? Possibly, if another high-profile celebrity-owned piece comes to light, especially something from Rolex's golden era of the 50s, 60s, or 70s, there's a chance. But it would take a story just as strong, just as emotional, just as iconic. Because in luxury collecting, value is built not just on scarcity, but on connection. And that's what the Paul Newman Daytona represents. Not just Rolex's finest moment at auction, but a perfect storm of culture, character, and craftsmanship. A watch that transcended the market to become something bigger, an artifact of modern history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the most expensive Rolex watches ever sold, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Luxury Insights, and let us know in the comments, which Rolex do you think will be the next record breaker? Until next time, stay stylish and stay informed.